So firstly, apologies for not being there with you today. It was not possible for me to travel, but I'm very happy to have the opportunity to present what we have done during the past number of years in this circular approach towards sustainable built environment. A short introduction of myself, I think Rune already gave it, but I'm a consultant and I'm running my company doing consultation, project management, research and training in this sustainable built environment field. I work for international clients and also nationally. In addition to that, I also have media activities on photographs and publishing, like I have published a couple of books from Africa, Latin America, Asia, based on the issues. But the topic for today about what I'm going to talk about, that relates with the One Planet Network, which is the platform that has a mandate to implement SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production. And the program consists of 6 programs. And the buildings and construction program is the one that I have been coordinating for the ministry for the past 8 years. We have quite a large network of actors around this topic, and our work, led by Finland, has been supported since the beginning. We started the work in 2015 by RMIT University in Australia and UNEP from Paris. And our close collaborators there is a mix of governments, industry, academia, civil society, and intergovernmental organizations. So this is the group with whom we have been trying to implement this sustainable consumption and production activities in the field of buildings. And in addition to that, we have gathered a network of over 100 organizations from almost 50 countries. And this approach we chose on this net zero carbon is that we look at the circular economy principles, how that can support us achieving that goal. And the other thing is what we call as responsibly sourced building materials. And there are quite many activities around climate mitigation. And I think Regis mentioned also this resilience, but for us, the focus is also to look at how this approach can support local job creation. And our focus is in the global south. The program is global, but the implementation projects are in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And the way how we are trying to achieve these goals is that we are sharing and developing policies, different tools, indicators that can be used for monitoring the trends and setting targets, and also good practices that can help then in successful implementation of this work. In this presentation, I have divided it into 4 parts. One is shortly about the impacts. I didn't unfortunately follow the previous presentations, but I assume that you have heard a lot about the environmental impacts, but we are also looking at the social and economic ones. So shortly on that. And then about the construction value chain. Who are the actors there? Which are the stages? Who are the externalities there who are influencing what is happening there? And what will be the outcomes and how the value is created, how it can be shared. And then our choice was quite early to build the work in some international recognized agenda, and we took this UN 2030 agenda for sustainable development. And we have been looking at how this circularity is present in those 17 sustainable development goals, 169 targets, and especially 231 indicators. So it's not mentioned there specifically, but there are quite many indicators that are relevant to that. And the advantage of this selecting an international framework is that they are based on international framework databases. We are not creating any new indicators. We are looking at what's already accessible and what can be found, where information can be found in those countries. And then what has turned out, at least according to our view, successful in our work is that we chose this case study approach. So we tried to show what has already been done and then study if that could be then tailored, adapted to local conditions, and applied also and mainstreams in different regions, and which are the business models there supporting those case study implementations. And I will leave enough space for discussion at the end of the presentation. So this is the structure, and we start from the impacts. And I think many people know about the energy and emissions, what comes for buildings and construction, but also waste is quite important negative impact that could be reduced. Then the extraction of materials also affects in the biodiversity loss. These aspects that are maybe not so much thought of, at least in my work in Latin America, they talk much more about the biodiversity, and it has been less present, but recently also gaining interest in Europe, if we talk about Europe. And at present, only less than 10% of the extracted materials are circular. Then if we think about the human health issues and indoor conditions, today, of course, this varies a lot, but I think they originate from the North America, but also in Europe, people spend quite big amount of their time inside, and therefore the way how we build buildings and how they are maintained, that has an important role. And then looking at the more maybe economic ones, so 8% of the workforce is working on the buildings and construction sector, and that contributes to 13% of the GDP. Then looking at how the construction process has been described, or life cycle stages, as we call it. This is from the standard, and one might mistakenly read it that we start from like extracting the raw materials and then finishing at waste. But that is not what this standard is communicating us. Actually, this module D that has been added there afterwards, it talks about the reuse, recycling, recovery aspects, and actually circularity is strongly present also in this standard. It means that if you are using recycled, even upcycled materials, you can benefit from that in the product phase. And then if you develop during the construction process products, systems that are easily deconstructed, demountable, without losing their value and reused elsewhere, you can report that also when you do your life cycle assessment. And that varies a bit across countries. Some countries already take that as a part of the LCA, but in other countries like Finland, in this case, it can be reported, but it's not like, because that is to avoid the double accounting. So if you have the same thing in two places, that is maybe not giving the overall view, but that varies, as said, a bit. But this waste processing for reuse, recycling, energy recovery, etc., they are already in this module C, end of life, but especially these benefits and loads beyond the system boundary in module D. So this is the standard, and then this is how we described our like a life cycle process in the SBC project or program. So this can be read in a way that you can start in any of these elements there or any of these phases. So you don't need to think of starting first to manufacture and then to design and so forth, but you can start like from the operation and phase as an example. So you're running a building and maintaining it, and then the user needs are changing, the environment is changing, you may need to renovate it, and then you look at which are the actors there in that stage that can contribute in that. But that's not all, because there are also other actors like external actors that are influencing in your life cycle process, and what we call as a playground. There are many things that are done already in the regulative phase. There are policies, there are incentives, and that is influencing in your process. Then if you think of the planning as an example, in the planning phase, zoning, that already defines what will be constructed where. And then looking at the environmental or other impacts, you need to link it, of course, like housing with work, like offices and workplaces, with the services, local services, then the public transport and so forth. And then there are, of course, many aspects also related with the financing and property market. But what should not be ignored here is that it's very important to get the client requirements. So one should know very well what should be done and how it can be then developed further and maintained across the process. Then looking at the outcomes, and these circles try to communicate how the value is created. If you, in this case, as an example, start from the manufacturing phase, once the goods with a low embodied carbon and maybe high recycled content and long service life are handled in the design phase, then you can design for adaptable spaces and disassembly and maybe create already the building passport in the design phase. So that will be then constructed in the zero waste, zero defect, in time assembly, and the value is at this high, it's the operation phase. However, that is a phase that is very long, as we know, and the users of the building may change and the conditions may change. Then it's also degrading along with time, and at some point, of course, depending how well you do your maintenance, but it's decreasing. But in this renovation phase, it is again like increasing. So this is what the thickness of the arrows try to communicate. Then from that phase, at some point, it goes to the deconstruction and end of life phase, and which then is important to know what can be reused and what can be recycled or even upcycled, which is not so commonly happening at present. However, some waste will be coming out of this circle, hopefully, that can be treated in a way that maybe it can serve somewhere else. So this is how we see the stages of the life cycle of buildings. And if we look at the value creation point of view, just some examples of what circularity can lead into, like reusing bricks. The carbon saving potential is quite important there. Also, the use of secondary aggregates, they can use the need of mineral resources. And there are some examples, like from London as an example, more than 100,000 tons of virgin materials were saved through circularity. It was close to 3,000 home projects. And then in Denmark, it was these recycle rows and upcycle studios. So new jobs and also decrease in acquisition and maintenance cost through circularity. Also from the global south, there were in India cases like in this Pulvila Net Zero campus, steel amount was reduced by 50% and cement by 30%. And Bio Hotel in Colombia, it was 70% of the needed materials came from the demolition waste. So when you set that as an objective, there are a lot of opportunities arising where you can reuse, and not only maybe the things from your own sector, but also from other sectors. Okay, the next topic is then about this international agenda. In our program, we started with producing those state of play for circular built environment reports. We did first those in Europe, North America, Oceania, Middle East, Asia, Africa, Latin America, and drew some global recommendations based on those. Then we mapped this UN 2030 agenda for sustainable development, looking at how the goals and indicators are present there based on a global survey, close to 200 answers. And then we collected those case studies. That's still an ongoing activity. But as an example, we have close to 50 of them from 17 countries in the global south. And I don't think many other platforms or programs have been able to so much highlight what is already existing there in Asia, Africa, Latin America, which is our focus area. Starting from the global recommendations, so firstly, we don't need to wait anything. The question is not when, but how fast we should move these linear processes to circular and gather the whole life cycle, those stages that were looked at a while ago. And then this indicator thing I mentioned, that's to support the monitoring and reporting, so that you know what you can set targets and you can monitor the trends and you can assess the state where you are. Then not only mitigation, but also adaptation and resilience that was mentioned already. Materials was also mentioned, and procurement processes. So that is one way of getting the things implemented and also getting the market like readiness there for providing solutions. It can start from the public procurement, but it can be also done in private sector. So we need always locally adapted solutions, and we need business models supporting those, and education is needed, awareness raising and capacity building to all actors in all phases, and collaboration is also needed across the whole supply chain. And these innovative financing models might support these activities. The examples you see here, just out of a building in Morocco. There's some rainwater harvesting and also other activities in Rwanda. And this is the office building in Kenya, in Gigiri. I was involved in that project while doing a procurement handbook for UNEP some years ago. We were able to save almost 75% of the energy consumption and replacing that by local solar systems, where the payback time was less than 4 years for this investment. So many things can be done when you set objectives and look carefully, study what you can do. Then on these SDGs, we looked at where circularity is mostly present, and there seemed to be 7 of them that were mostly focused there. Like SDG 12 is high in all areas, but if you look at the global scale, there's SDG 8 on economic growth and 11 on cities. That seems to be high. In the Northern Hemisphere, it's more 9, which is the industrialization, and 13 climate, and South seems to be water and energy. Why the number of global is so small here in this figure is that it means that those that assessed in our survey at the global scale, but those that are specifically in North and specifically in South, they are the other numbers. So out of the 185. And then going to the indicators, we found out, and that's what we have been using since that out of the 231 indicators, there are 5 of them that seem to be applicable both globally and regionally. So material footprint, in some cases the targets are different, but the indicators are the same, and that goes to the 8.4.1 and 12.1. Recycling, another one, local materials, which unfortunately now when validating those indicators, they are still looking for a better indicator for that. So it's not in use at present as such. And then the CO2 emissions. In addition to that, there are 9 what we see as global secondary indicators, 2 of them dealing with water, 2 of them energy, 2 of them for cities, then 2 for sustainable consumption and production, and 1 for climate. So this set of indicators, 5 plus 9, we see global, and then we have been looking at how they are reflected in different regions. And we have like data on that based on the 35 African responses, 7 Asia, and 20 from Latin America. Based on that, we have a set to discuss with the local governments and local actors on which are the measures that could be taken in their region, their country, their city. This is an ongoing process. Then some examples, there are 2 of them with case studies, 2 of them from Asia, 2 from Africa, 2 from Latin America. So as an example, this construction and demolition waste can be really recycled when you develop those facilities for that. And in India, they have, at least in some regions, they have been able to create also some incentives there, which means that the solutions become economically viable already in the beginning, and then when the lessons are learned, it can be then scaled up. And there are also some regenerative, like a neighborhood or smaller scale improvement, where you can use the locally sourced handicraft products and biodegradable materials. This is from Pakistan, and you can see the change in the outlook. Then moving to Africa, they have developed this green building indicator system, and with that, they now are planning to extend it to cover, let's say, number of house building types, and also get it like a national system. So when you develop a local system with indicators that the designers and different practitioners on energy, water efficiency, environment protection, etc. So that means that maybe the other rating schemes developed in the Northern Hemisphere are not fitting so well with local conditions, but once you do something like that together with your local stakeholders, that is adopted more widely. Then there are some examples of reuse, like affordable homes. So this is from Uganda, and that was monitored or let's say initiated by an Upcycle Africa, which is a social enterprise, and low-income families can let's say use that. In Latin America, there are also big actors like Cemex, as an example, that has a sustainability model of substituting raw materials from resources with smaller environmental impact, also substituting fossil fuels and looking at the recirculation and also recovery of quarry sites. And these companies, they work all over in Latin America and maybe even beyond. And this is an example from Colombia, kind of a closed municipal dump in Medellin became an informal settlement, and they started to develop and improve the life conditions and providing local jobs, and they were able to create then like a community gardening, flowering production, and composting using as a substrate for their growing. So these were examples from the global south. And when we look at the possible business models, this is a bit coming also from the closer to us. Like maybe you have heard about this town hall, Brummen in the Netherlands, and there the client, the city hall, city authorities, they decided they don't want to own the building. They already only organized the lease contract for 20 years, which means that the supplier that was assembling it, they were like promising to take it away after 20 years. And in a way, when they did a design for this disassembly, 90% of its materials are easily dismantled, and they estimated to achieve 30% cost saving there. And then the other companies like this Rotodi Construction, Belgian company, so they are evaluating what is the reuse potential in buildings. And that is one topic that is very much discussed in our country also. So if we have to deconstruct some building, what all can be, if it has been not designed for disassembly, what can be evacuated, what can be reused from there without losing their value. There was also a case in Denmark that is not in this slide. I think in last year I mentioned about it. So the client, or let's say the architect that was the principal designer, collected a pool of companies. There were, I think, 18 or 20 companies there with whom they started to develop the product or a system, which consists of like a unit that can be then multiplied. You can use it as a row house or apartment building. And if you want to move it somewhere else, it's very easy to disassemble. It was like a bolt connections in the prefab concrete solution. There has been also LCA studies. They are comparing
how much saving can be achieved. But of course, if nothing is changing in 40 years or 60 years, and you don't disassemble these components or buildings, it may not be so much saving. But if the environment changes and you want to move these elements somewhere else, that is more profitable. Then there are different digital platforms. There's one in Lufront, Norway, about the marketplace for reused building materials. This is sometimes a tricky thing, because if you disassemble, deconstruct a building somewhere, you don't know where that might be needed in a couple of years, and who is storing it where. There's another case in South Africa. It was the main contractor, it's called DigiYard, that they developed. That was for small-scale informal contractors, and the company there, I think it was an Arab filial there in South Africa, they had some leftover building materials typically from the building sites, and they wanted to get rid of those instead of going for waste. And then those SMEs were able to access information about that through this digital platform, and then they could negotiate what could be reused from there. In Senegal, there was a Rabat, and they had a construction demolition action there. So it was a government-led activity, how these things could be retrieved. There are a couple of minutes left. I see something that is going on now. We are just about to conclude one project in Burkina and Sri Lanka that's led by UN Habitat. And there the approach was to develop tools with which the UN country offices can discuss with the local governments. So the country assessment is to assess the national priorities, like is it for housing, is it which are the things where the focus should be put. Then the advocacy toolkit that then builds based on that. So how to go on, which are the next steps. Mainstreaming guidance is a platform for LCA tools, so that you can validate also the impacts that you are building. The other tool, value assessment tool, is more to monitor the performance. That's based on the tool that was earlier developed in the SPC project. You may have heard of a tool called Sherpa that was like a design tool. The other ongoing project that is funded by, in this case, by the German government that we initiated, that is still going, it's actually only starting now, and the countries there, the partner countries are India, Bangladesh, Ghana, and Senegal. That's led by UNEP, and it intends to exploit the tools from the previous project and look at especially building materials. So which are the local solutions that might fit? And then we are having a smaller project there on looking at the locally sourced materials and their potential in urban construction. We chose Africa there as a continent because that's rapidly urbanizing, and we tried to propose a kind of a model solution that can consist of low carbon superstructure of the building, and then circular infill, like and that could be then 4 to 6 floors in a dense urban construction with services. I'm happy to tell more about that if there's some discussion at the end. But to conclude this introduction is that circularity, in our mind, contributes to sustainability and affects the entire value chain. And most decisions affecting circularity are done in the design stage already. So that should be, if the client is not setting it as an objective, then the designer should still think about the circular opportunities. The external actors like the planners, regulators, incentivizers, they have a big role there, and also the financiers. But clients' requirements should be found out early in the process, because they influence so much in the process. And the regulatory framework should support it. And capacity building and circular models are needed in all stages to all actors that should be collaborating. Then just to finish a short publicity, we are having some workshops and presenting things of our SPC program in our conference, virtual conference in Helsinki in November. And that's the first place where we are testing this African
model construction, circular model construction, and the second one is then in this World Circular Economy Forum, which will be for the first time brought to Africa in December. And then the last thing is that our mandate for this SDG 12 implementation will conclude by the end of this year, but UNEP, who is handling the secretariat of this instrument, has been extending the mandate from 23 to 2030. So it will continue in some form, the work. So we are like wrapping up what we have done in 8 years, but the work will still continue with a bit larger scale. So why I say put here SBE means it's sustainable built environment. It's a bit extending from buildings to neighborhoods, but we don't know the details about that yet. Actually, in 2 weeks' time, there's a board meeting in Paris where the new strategy will be hopefully approved, and after that we can discuss more in detail what in which form will start in the beginning of next year. But I finish here and I'm happy to take the question.
Okay.
You can also praise them in French if you like.
Thank you, Pekka, for this very clear presentation.